everyone else remotely will see them as well. And let's see, make sure I got it. Yes. There we are. You doubted. There was doubt. I sensed a bit of doubt that that wasn't going to show up.
I was waiting and was wondering.
So I am a serial entrepreneur. I started my career at Bell Northern Research back when it was Bell Northern Research. I left Bell Northern Research in 1996, raised $13.5 million, started a company doing data analysis, sold it to Cognos. And then started a second company, did it for 3 years, raised no money, sold it to nobody. I then became VP of sales at another startup for 4 years, and that's when I met Tony and Richard. And I want to walk you through how we got here today from sort of the entrepreneur's point of view. So you'll see this slide again at the end, but I bring it up first because it recognizes that we wouldn't be here today unless there are a lot of smart people around the world who became committers, contributors to the open source project. You know how it works. You put up the code and you say, if people want to make this better, you know, if they've got skills, you can join into the project. So I'm going to bring this slide up at the end, and then we'll get a chance to talk to the people who are online, those of them that were able to join us. So it started off, like Tony said, in 2008, and here's what I saw. Carleton had developed an open source web conferencing system. Before they paid this much money, and afterwards they paid that much, right? Everything else is details. I saw the technology was immature, and it was just sort of pulling together the latest open source products. That's a good sign. If you want to get into a market, you get in when the technology is still just starting, and then you go all in. You do not. You hope that other people kind of take their time. You hope other people maybe, you know, don't take it as seriously. You go all in. You push as hard as you can, and if you get ahead, you keep ahead. And what I saw, they're doing a global trend, right? Distance education. Every university and college in the world is going to move towards online if they have not already. And I also saw it was a pull business model. So this is my take on open source. You give something away for free, and people get hooked, but at the end they really realize that to do this in a production environment, they need support. And who do they go back to support? They go back to the companies who have built the software. We're one of those companies. You know, others, again, you'll talk to around the world later on tonight, who are also contributing to the software and building companies around it. Okay, so BigBlueButton, a little history. It started off with chat, video, slides, and voice. And my purpose of showing this is to show you what's happened in the last basically 18 months. We then released another version. June of 2009 had packaging in a virtual machine. There's Hasib here from Avaya who was telling me earlier how much the virtual machine meant. You could download and you could run BigBlueButton in 15 minutes. Okay, this was really important to get adoption, because if you couldn't, if you had to install it through 15 pages of install instructions, you would fail. Right? So that was one of the first things we did. We packaged this up to make the barriers to adoption low. Then Richard wrote desktop sharing, okay, which is one of the features that people asked for. Our target market is distance education. So for the professor or the teacher to be able to show, let me show you the application. Let me point and see, you know, you can see what I'm seeing, was really important. Next, we added voice over IP. The day we added voice over IP, I went online and there was people from China, all around the world I started chatting to with their product, right? I met Zai and Shen from using the voice over IP. They're in China. 0.61 was just bug fixing, stabilizing. We're now up to November 2009, desktop sharing. Richard rewrote it, made it faster, and we created a developer VM. That meant you could download the BigBlueButton VM and you also had a full development environment as well. Again, we're thinking of this, how can we make it easier for people to adopt? 0.63, rewrote voice over IP. Added an API, added localization. You'll see in a moment what that localization did for us. 0.64, Richard refactored desktop sharing again, supporting larger meetings, and we also added packaging as well for RPM, another distribution. So I'll give you the secret for open source. You treat it like a real product. Okay, so we develop on agile development, 6 to 8 week cycles. We broke down what does it take for someone to get to that steps to stage 5. Right? You think about it in your mind, what has to happen? They move from unaware to aware of your product. Hey, this sounds pretty good. They move to try it out. This says something to me that I can use, right? Web-based collaboration. Those two boxes, try out and evaluate, those are the key ones. If you can think, someone once told me, if you can put yourself in the customer's headset, you are 50% of the way there to making a sale. So when you think of open source, we treat it like a product. Formal release cycles. And by treating it like a product, when you break down, like try out, we ask ourselves, okay, what does someone do? How can I start it up? Is it stable? Is it easy to use? I don't care about features until those things are working, because you never get down to evaluating it with others or deploying it. So that's what we started with. And with lots of good feedback from Carlton, we did it. I have to say this, it's sort of like, do you know Randy Posh, who gave the last lecture? So he had a quote saying that he was in football, and a lot of the coaches would yell at him. And they yelled at him, he realized after all, because they care. And if they stopped yelling, it meant they stopped caring. And I've had a chance to work with Carlton, the Tim faculty, and Tony. And if you ask me how it's like to work with Tony, let me just say, Tony really cares. So that's treated like a product, but we're not the only product in the market space. Okay? There are many commercial web conferencing systems. We are not competing against any of them, right? So if you want to go to market, you define your market. You redefine the problem. The problem isn't we're trying to kill Cisco or WebEx. The problem is we're trying to solve Tony's and Tim's and Michael's problems right here. That's the focus. That's the bowling pin for Jeffrey Moore. So anything we do from that takes us away. Our goal is to make that bowling pin drop. Okay? Now, we're not the only open source solution out there. There are others. DimDim raised $6.5 million. I feel for them. I raised money before. I know what they're going through. ePresence, another company, they also raised some money. WebHustle, Open Meetings, and there's BigBlueButton. So here's what our users, our contributors, have been telling us about it. DimDim and ePresence are moving towards proprietary. I hope they go all the way, right? Fewer competition for us. The open source ones win in the end. Look at MySQL, right? There's two other ones that are good, WebHustle and Open Meetings. They say there's problems with the UI. It's just too complex, right? When a professor goes up and stands and starts to do a lecture, they don't want to have any impediments for themselves or for the students. If a student says, I can't figure this out, that's the adoption problem. That was stage 4. You don't get to stage 5. So what we've heard from BigBlueButton, we like it because it's open source. And it's not open source because we say it's open source. It's open source because we do open source. I don't stand up here and say how great it is. I'm telling you how I'm sharing with you how others are, and others are sharing that because the documentation, the quality of the code, the release process, that's what the differentiation for us. We base it on Asterisk, an open source web conference, or open source PBX. So we're now on the Asterisk exchange, so all the Asterisk companies out there can take BigBlueButton and make money with it. Treat it like a product, and oh, by the way, there's more. There was only one open source web conferencing system that got the Google Summer of Code. That's the clap time. Man, I'll tell you, in our office, so it's Richard and I and Islam and Chris and Dennis and Sebastian, when we were on that Friday, when we got that notice, man, we were humming, right? It was like, man, had we ever thought that we were going to make it that far, right? It's a step along the way, and then it's a great step. Okay. So what did that step mean? Well, this is what it means. That graph is the traffic in our mailing list. So have you found us back in June of 08, you would have seen just a few messages, right? So you might have thought, man, this product's not going anywhere, right? Right? But if you think like an entrepreneur, early stage technology, growth of a market, if you push really hard, right? So we started pushing really hard. And those things that I showed you on the releases, well, this is what's happened for us in the last 2 months, 3 months. That spike is now at 900 messages a month from developers and users on our mailing list. And as Steve once pointed out, he said, Fred, I go onto your most mailing lists have people saying bad things about them. And there's hardly anybody saying bad things about BigBlueButton. They've already gotten installing it. They want to start using it. They have questions about it. How do I integrate it? How do I deploy it? How as a student do I join your Google Summer of Code? And that's the doing part, right? We have never stood up and said, we write good open source. We've stood up and said, we're trying to write a really good web conferencing system. And if you want to join our project, here's documentation, here's the code, so on.